The bustling city of Manila in the Philippines is renowned not only as the country's capital, but also for its rich culture and history that attracts travelers from all around the globe. Amidst the towering skyscrapers and modern buildings lies the storied past of the world-famous landmark called Intramuros, an ancient walled city built by the early Spanish settlers in the 1500s. The city is lined with cobblestone streets that resonate with the footsteps of countless tourists and locals, their steps blending with the soft murmur of historical tales carried by the wind. A short walk away lies Rizal Park, a sprawling green space where the rhythms of local life harmonize with the footsteps of curious tourists. On any given day, dozens, if not hundreds of people gather here, mingling and enjoying the park's serene beauty. However, in the year 2010, the park was shattered by a tragedy that would forever alter the lives of many. On August 23, 2010, a sightseeing bus filled with 20 tourists from Hong Kong, 5 Filipinos and a tour guide was on a routine tour of Manila's historic landmarks. As the bus was preparing to leave Intramuros, a man wearing a police uniform joined the queue of passengers that were boarding the vehicle. His name was Rolando Mendoza. Armed with a service pistol and a rifle, he seemed like just another figure of authority that was on patrol in the area. But on that fateful day, Rolando had something planned up his sleeve. As he inched closer to the door, he tried getting on the bus, but the tour guide who was standing by the door stopped him and politely asked his purpose. In response, Rolando said he wanted to hitch a ride to the outskirts of Metro Manila, but the driver refused. What happened next would set off a nightmare, unlike any seen before. Rolando swiftly raised his rifle, aiming it at the driver and the tour guide. He then forced his way onto the bus, pointing the barrel of his gun at the innocent tourists, who were now screaming in terror at the sight of the armed and dangerous police officer. In a commanding voice, he shouted for everyone to close the curtains and ordered the bus driver to head towards Rizal Park. At this point, it was immediately clear that Rolando was not messing around, and the bus, originally intended for sightseeing, was now being hijacked. For the next 12 hours, the world watched in horror as the hijacking escalated into a full-blown hostage crisis. As the hours passed, Rolando claimed the lives of 8 innocent people. Then, 2 canisters of tear gas were thrown inside the bus, forcing him out and directly into the crosshairs of a police sniper. From One Up Media, this is Mass Murders. Manila is a city that is steeped in rich history and cultural diversity. For centuries, it served as the heart of the nation's political, economic, and social life. Today, towering skyscrapers stand alongside centuries-old churches, and traditional markets thrive amid grand shopping malls. This juxtaposition creates a dynamic urban landscape that draws in millions of visitors each year. So it's no surprise that Manila's tourism industry is booming, with many travel companies eager to capitalize. One of these companies was from abroad. It was named Hong Thai Travel Services. Hong Thai was one of the largest travel agencies based in Hong Kong, and in 2010, they were offering attractive tour packages for those interested to visit and experience Manila for themselves. At the time, the Leong family from Hong Kong saw this as a perfect opportunity to go on a vacation, and as a result, Amy Leong and her husband, Ken, booked a trip to Manila with their 3 children, eager to experience the rich history and vibrant culture of the city. The family of 5 set off with excitement and anticipation, But by the end of their trip, not all of them would make it home. On August 23rd, the Leong family were up early, eager to embark on a day of sightseeing around the historic landmarks and streets of Manila. By 9 a.m., the family, along with the other passengers on a Hong Thai tour bus, had already explored the cobblestone streets and old churches within the walled city of Intramuros. This was when the group began making their way back to their bus, parked just outside Fort Santiago, the historic citadel of Intramuros. Leading the way was their guide, Masatse Ting Chun, and together, the group walked as they chatted and laughed, their spirits high from the morning's adventures. As they began boarding the tour bus, an unexpected figure began making his way towards the door. He was a police officer, dressed in a blue uniform, with a long rifle slung over his shoulders. At first glance, he appeared harmless, just a policeman on his routine patrol at the tourist site. He may have even given the tourists a sense of security, knowing that the park was under the watchful eye of the authorities. But what no one realized was that his eyes were fixed on the line of tourists boarding the Hong Thai bus. At the time, the tour guide, Masa, was standing right outside the bus doors, ushering all the passengers back inside. However, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the police officer closing in. Approaching the group, the officer introduced himself to Masa as Senior Inspector Rolando Mendoza. He showed his badge and ID to Masa and asked if he could hitch a ride. Masa hesitated, puzzled as to why a uniformed police officer would need a lift. Couldn't he just ask his fellow officers for an escort? With an awkward smile, Masa politely declined, explaining that the bus was exclusively hired to transport paying tourists. With the same smile, he turned around and boarded the bus himself. He expected the policeman to leave, but instead, Rolando grabbed his rifle and pointed it at Masa, who was caught off guard. Rolando demanded to be let on board, and with no other option, Masa nodded and stepped aside. The atmosphere was already tense as Rolando entered the bus, but it quickly escalated when he began pointing the barrel of his gun recklessly at the innocent tourists. As the passengers on board realized the dire situation, they began to scream and panic. In response, Rolando shouted, declaring a hostage situation and ordering everyone to stay still. Noticing that some of them were not complying, he pointed the gun against their heads and threatened to pull the trigger. For Amy Leong and her husband Ken, they immediately ducked and frantically gestured for their children, seated across the aisle, to do the same. Rolando scanned his surroundings and then ordered the driver, Alberto Lubang, and tour guide Masa to drive to Quirino Grandstand, located right in front of Rizal Park. He then commanded the passengers to close the curtains of the bus, which they did without hesitation. It was around 10 a.m. when the tour bus arrived at the grandstand, and Rolando commanded the driver to stop the bus in the middle of the 8-lane highway, directly in front of the grandstand gates. To ensure the driver couldn't escape, he whipped out a pair of handcuffs and cuffed him to the steering wheel. As the bus was sitting stationary in the middle of the busy highway, frustrated motorists began to gather, curious about the cause of the disruption. However, it didn't take long for them to realize the gravity of the situation. Through the narrow gaps in the bus windows, they caught glimpses of a man with an M16 strapped to his chest. This sight was enough to send them fleeing in terror. Moments later, word of the unfolding hostage crisis spread quickly, causing panic among the onlookers and attracting the attention of local authorities and media. Within moments, the area was abuzz with police sirens, news crews, and a growing crowd. The initial chaos quickly attracted not only local media outlets in the Philippines, but also international news organizations. The eyes of the world were now fixed on the tour bus. As more police vehicles arrived on the scene, Manila's police negotiators, led by Superintendent Orlando Yebra and Chief Inspector Romeo Salvador, began their attempts to establish communication with Rolando. The gunman's demand was clear. He wanted to be reinstated back to the chief of the Manila Police Mobile Patrol Unit, and if the government agreed to his demand, he would surrender. Now, Rolando's request was fairly simple. It seems that he had lost his job in the police force and was desperate for reinstatement. You see, the backstory began in April 2008 when a hotel chef named Christian Calao accused Rolando and several other officers of misconduct over a parking violation. Calao alleged that the police had planted sachets of methamphetamine in his car, forced him to take the drug, and then accused him of being a drug addict. The officers also allegedly coerced Calao into accessing his bank ATM and handing over money. Calao claimed he was released only after a friend had raised 20,000 pesos on his behalf. In the aftermath of this ordeal, Rolando and 4 other police officers were found guilty of misconduct, resulting in their dismissal from service and loss of pension and benefits. During that same period, he was relieved of his position as chief of the Mobile Patrol Unit, and about a year later, he was completely dismissed from the police force on charges of extortion. Rolando's 2 brothers, Gregorio and Florencio, stated that all he ever wanted was a fair hearing by the court, which, in their words, never even gave him a chance to defend himself. They just immediately dismissed him. This deep sense of injustice must have fueled Rolando's actions. He was angry, frustrated, and disillusioned with the justice system. He felt that his future had been taken from him due to a misunderstanding, and he believed that the only way to reclaim his job was through drastic measures. It was now about an hour since the bus first stopped on the highway, and inside, the atmosphere was thick with fear and uncertainty. Hostages clung to each other, whispering prayers and words of comfort as they anxiously awaited their fate. With time running out, Alfredo Lim, the mayor of Manila, stated that he would grant Rolando's wish to be reinstated if he could prove his case. In response, Rolando released 6 hostages, including an elderly couple, a mother with her 2 young children, and a 12-year-old boy. However, this release was contingent upon 2 Filipino photographers boarding the bus as volunteer hostages in exchange for the freed captives. By now, close to every news channel had their cameras fixed on the bus, broadcasting the events live. The sight of hostages stepping off the bus may have even offered a glimmer of hope that the situation might resolve peacefully. However, this hope was short-lived. By noon, hostage negotiators initially believed they were making progress in de-escalating the situation. But as the hours dragged on without a resolution, the tension began to rise once again. The weather, too, mirrored the mood inside the bus, with dark clouds gathering and rain beginning to fall, casting a gloomy shadow over the scene. With no news from the police, Rolando grew more frustrated by the minute, and he eventually resorted to posting notes on the bus windows, warning those outside of dire consequences if his demands were not met. At 2 p.m., he wrote his first ominous message and placed it on the bus windows. It read, "A big mistake to correct a big wrong decision." A few minutes later, he made another note. This time it read, "Big deal will start after 3 p.m. today." And then finally, another note was pasted on the windscreen. This time it read, "3 p.m. today, deadlock." To the police, the notes were a grim reminder that the clock was ticking and that the situation was becoming increasingly perilous. If nothing was done, there would be serious consequences. Then, out of nowhere, a man in civilian attire and rubber flip-flops arrived at the scene and was walking towards the tour bus. Police quickly identified him as Rolando's brother, Rolando Mendoza, who was also a police officer. However, The records are unclear about how Gregorio managed to enter the exclusion zone. He didn't have permission from the authorities. It seemed as if he simply showed up and began walking towards the bus. At the time, TV broadcasts show Gregorio entering the tour bus and speaking with his brother Rolando. While initial reports did not specify the conversation's details, it was later revealed that Gregorio was attempting to calm his brother and persuade him to surrender and release the hostages. Sources say that he urged Rolando to surrender peacefully, reassuring him by saying, "Nothing bad will happen here." However, it seemed that Gregorio's attempt to calm his brother didn't work. Moments later, he was seen leaving the bus and walking back towards the row of police vehicles. This was when several officers noticed Gregorio carrying his service firearm, which immediately raised alarms among the negotiators and aroused suspicions of a potential conspiracy. As Gregorio approached the police motorcade, he was swiftly arrested, and his gun was confiscated. Despite the abrupt arrest, he cooperated fully and was escorted to the nearest police station. All of this was captured live on the news, and what the police didn't know at the time was that inside the bus, Rolando could watch the live stream on a TV console. He saw the police's treatment of his brother, which filled him with mounting anger and frustration. The sight of Gregorio being taken away in handcuffs only intensified Rolando's resolve, setting the stage for the impending chaos. As tensions reached a boiling point, both inside and outside the bus, the hostages could feel the shift in the atmosphere, their fear deepening as they sensed Rolando's growing desperation and fury. The pressure was unbearable, with everyone on edge, waiting for the next move. Then, at 7:21 p.m. sharp, gunshots were heard emanating from within the bus.
The Philippines hostage drama has turned deadly. Police fired on the bus.
By 7 p.m., the tour bus, owned by the Hong Thai Travel Company, remained motionless, parked perpendicular to an 8-lane highway at Rizal Park. It had already been 9 hours since Rolando Mendoza had hijacked the vehicle, and about 24 Hong Kong tourists were trapped in the bus, held against their will. Records state that around this time, Rolando was on the phone with a radio anchor from a local station, RMN. As he spoke, his attention drifted to the television screen inside the bus. What he saw there made his blood run cold. The police were arresting his brother. In an instant, something inside him snapped. He shouted into his cell phone, his voice trembling with fury. "Why did you arrest my brother? He did nothing wrong. He's innocent. Release Gregorio, or I'll kill everyone." Several minutes later, gunshots rang out from inside the bus. Without warning, Rolando sprang to his feet, his face contorted with rage. His hand shook as it gripped the cold steel of his rifle, and with a raw, primal scream, he squeezed the trigger. Immediately, the ear-splitting crack of gunfire tore through the silence. Bullets sprayed in all directions, ripping through metal, shattering glass, and tearing into flesh. In response, the hostages screamed and scrambled to the floor, trying desperately to find cover. But in the confined spaces of the bus, there was barely anywhere they could hide. It had become a slaughterhouse. One by one, the tourists fell, their pleas for mercy drowned out by the relentless barrage of gunfire. Blood immediately soaked the seats and pooled on the floor, mingling with shards of broken glass. What made this even more horrifying was that the entire ordeal was broadcasted live on the radio. What you're about to listen to is a recording of the conversation between Rolando and the radio host. You'll hear the moment when his rage boils over, leading to the gunfire. Please be advised, this audio may be disturbing. The barrage of gunfire had resulted in 8 passengers losing their lives. But the nightmare was still far from over. At 7:30 p.m., the situation took a dramatic turn when the bus driver, Alberto Lubang, made a desperate bid for freedom. His heart pounding in his chest, he frantically struggled with the handcuffs that bound him to the steering wheel. To his surprise, he managed to break free, and without hesitation, he lunged for the door, flinging it open and leaping onto the open road. Television networks captured the moment of Alberto racing toward the row of police cars that were lined up at a distance from the bus. His face was filled with obvious terror as he waved his arms at the officers, frantically calling for help. Amid the chaos, Alberto was heard screaming frantically to the police, "Everyone is dead!" The officers, initially shocked by the sudden eruption of pandemonium, quickly shifted their focus to the terrified driver. His desperate words, however, only intensified their dread. What had begun as a tense, hours-long standoff now appeared to have descended into a full-blown massacre, the gravity of which was just beginning to dawn on everyone present. At this moment, the negotiators, realizing that the events were rapidly spiraling out of control, urgently called in the SWAT team to regain command. But the SWAT team was unprepared for the chaos that awaited them. At 7:37 p.m., the SWAT team moved in, armed with sledgehammers and a clear mission. But their movements were noted to be slow and disjointed, possibly hampered by poor coordination. With the officers surrounding both sides of the bus, they pounded on the door, a desperate attempt to gain entry and end the bloodshed inside. But the door held firm, refusing to yield. As the SWAT team struggled with gaining access into the bus, more gunshots rang out from within the bus. At 7:41 p.m., an additional 2 police mobile units moved in from either side of the bus, aiming to break the windows from the rear. They also decided to deploy tear gas canisters inside, and as the canisters were hurled into the bus, thick, suffocating smoke began to fill the interior. However, while this was intended to draw out Rolando, it made the already traumatized hostages gasp for air. Eventually, the police realized that deploying tear gas had been a grave mistake. Given the unique circumstances, the gas had not only blinded both the officers and the hostages, but also drove Rolando into an even deeper rage. Outside, the tension was unbearable as everyone anxiously awaited any indication that the nightmare was drawing to a close. But at 8:04 p.m., another round of shots rang out. Moments later, the police attempted to force the bus door open using a rope, but the plan quickly went awry. Instead of tearing the door open, the rope snapped, leaving the officers in a state of frustration and disbelief. Then, through the smoke-filled windows, a hostage could be seen slumped near the front door. This haunting image became one of the most horrific moments of the broadcast, because the silhouette of the body was unmistakably clear, and it left no doubt that the individual was dead. As each police team had failed time and time again to regain control of the situation, frustration and disbelief began to grow around the world. Many viewers were appalled by the response of the local police and even the SWAT team, with critics labeling it as a catastrophic mishandling of the crisis. Live reports at the time highlighted the inefficiency of the Filipino police, with some commentators suggesting that if this had happened in another country, the hostage taker would have been subdued long ago. In response to the mounting criticism and the worsening situation, the then Philippine President, Benigno Aquino III, ordered the Elite Special Action Force, or SAF, to intervene. The SAF is renowned for their precision and expertise, and they are often only called upon in the most critical and dangerous situations. Their intervention was not just a tactical decision, it was a desperate bid to restore order before all hope was lost. Because if the SAF couldn't succeed, it seemed doubtful that anyone could. As the night deepened, the streets around Rizal Park were bathed in the eerie glow of flashing lights. The air was thick with anxious murmurs from the press and officials who were watching the crisis unfold before them. The SWAT team's failed attempts to breach the bus had left the scene in complete disarray. The ground outside was littered with spent bullet casings and shattered glass, remnants of the chaotic and desperate efforts to end the standoff. Despite all this destruction, the most critical threat remained unchanged. Rolando was still inside the bus, armed and dangerous. When the SAF arrived at the scene, they moved with precision, assessing the chaotic situation within minutes and swiftly devising a plan to bring the crisis to a definitive end. This time, the operation unfolded with remarkable speed. In just 15 minutes, the SAF had established their positions. The first response officers were poised to breach the bus, while snipers took up strategic posts around the perimeter, their scopes trained on any sign of movement. With a synchronized signal, the officers sprang into action. Tear gas canisters were launched into the rear of the bus, releasing thick clouds of smoke that quickly filled the confined space. Inside, the hostages once again found themselves engulfed in the acrid fumes. They gasped for air, their eyes burning, their vision blurred. Disoriented by the tear gas and consumed by rage, Rolando was resolute in his intention to shoot at the officers attempting to breach the bus. Driven by fury, he stumbled toward the front door, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands, ready to unleash his wrath. However, just as he neared the door, preparing to make his move, a single, deafening shot pierced the tense silence. The sniper's bullet had found its mark, striking Rolando right in the head and killing him instantly. In mere seconds, Rolando crumpled to the ground, his body collapsing with the upper half hanging out of the bus. The rifle he had clutched so tightly began to slip from his lifeless fingers, clattering softly as it hit the floor. The threat had been neutralized. Rolando was dead, yet the scene was shrouded in a tense, eerie silence. The air, thick with the remnants of smoke and chaos, seemed to hold its breath as everyone watched, waiting for any sign of movement, any hint that the nightmare had truly ended. Once the situation was confirmed to be under control, the SAF officers cautiously entered the bus. Inside, they were met with a grim sight: blood-stained seats, shattered glass, and the lifeless bodies of several hostages. One by one, the hostages were carefully brought out of the bus. Some were able to walk out on their own, shaken but alive. Others, however, were carried out in body bags. As the last of the hostages were removed, a heavy silence settled over the scene. The operation was finally over, but the question lingered in the air: at what cost had this nightmare come to an end? In the days that followed, the Philippine government launched an extensive investigation into the tragic events. Their findings were nothing short of damning. The bus had carried a total of 25 people, but by the end of the ordeal, 9 had lost their lives, including Rolando. Another 9 were left severely injured, and among them were 2 innocent bystanders who were caught in the crossfire. The Leong family faced unimaginable loss. Their father, Ken, was fatally shot while attempting to subdue Rolando. His 2 daughters, 21-year-old Doris and 14-year-old Jessie, were also tragically killed during the crisis. Only Amy, the mother, and their 18-year-old son, Jason, survived. However, Jason sustained a severe head wound that left him in a coma. He was later flown back to Hong Kong for treatment, where he ultimately survived, but suffered permanent brain damage. Initial reports of the incident sharply criticized the Manila Police Department's handling of the crisis, revealing a series of critical errors that worsened the situation. One of the most significant mistakes identified was the arrest of Rolando Mendoza, Rolando's brother, which was seen as a major factor that escalated Rolando's rage and desperation. The leadership of Alfredo Lim, the mayor of Manila, also came under intense scrutiny, particularly for his failure to properly activate the Crisis Management Committee. This oversight left negotiators without essential information and guidance, crippling their ability to manage the escalating tension effectively. The investigation further exposed the glaring inadequacies of the SWAT team, whose poorly executed assault on the bus not only failed to resolve the crisis, but actually deepened it. Additionally, the media also came under fire for its live broadcasts that exposed police tactics, allowing Rolando to not only anticipate their moves, but also to grow more agitated. Many question why such extensive media coverage was permitted during a crisis like this, and some even speculated that if the media hadn't reported so intensively, the outcome might have been very different. The aftermath was both swift and severe. Numerous officers faced suspension, and political careers were left in shambles. The crisis not only sent shockwaves through the Philippines, but also significantly strained its diplomatic relations with Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government was outraged by the gross mishandling of the situation and demanded full accountability. In response, they launched their own investigation, intensifying the international scrutiny on the Philippines and heightening tensions between the two regions. For the victims' families, this tragedy became a powerful call for justice. Their grief transformed into a determined demand for accountability and change, reflecting the widespread belief that had the crisis been managed more effectively, those lives might have just been spared. To the public, the failure wasn't just in the SWAT team's botched attempt or the relentless media coverage. It was in the authorities' inability to listen, to truly grasp the desperation in Rolando's demands and the terror in the voices of the hostages. Although the police negotiators spoke to Rolando, they failed to do something crucial. They didn't truly listen to him. If there had been a more effective way of communication, if someone had genuinely heard Mendoza's grievances, and if there had been a coordinated effort to manage the crisis from the beginning, the outcome could have been very different. Perhaps one of the most crucial lessons from this entire ordeal is that the most powerful tools in a crisis are not weapons or commands, but the ability to listen. Mass Murders is a One-Up Media original. A quick word on our reenactments and dramatizations. While we can't know exactly what they say, think, or feel at the moment, it is all based on research. This episode was produced by Ethan Sam. Our executive producer is Guang Jin. Story writing and research by M. Audio engineering by Van An and Ethan Sam. Narrated by Jason. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.